a small village nestled between rolling hills and quiet rivers. Sara's early life was shaped by the warmth of a home filled with laughter, love, and the smell of her mother's cooking. Rachel, her mother, was the heart of their small household, a woman who made their modest life feel like a kingdom. For Sara, life had always been simple: school in the mornings, playing with her friends by the river in the afternoons, and cozy evenings with her mother telling stories by the fire. They had little in terms of material wealth, but the bond they shared was rich with affection. Then everything changed the day her mother passed away. It wasn't an accident, nor was it sudden. Rachel's illness had slowly eaten away at her, and despite all the doctors and treatments, there was no cure. Sara watched helplessly as the woman who had always been her protector, her comfort, her everything, slipped away. Her father, David, lost not just his wife, but the love and light that had once kept him grounded. David tried to be strong for Sara, but in the aftermath of Rachel's death, something inside of him broke. He became a shadow of the man he once was. He buried himself in his work and his grief, leaving Sara to fend for herself emotionally. But just a year after Rachel's death, David met Eva. She was warm, with a smile that could light up a room, and a kindness that seemed genuine. At first, Sara felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this woman could bring some sense of normalcy back into their broken home. But that hope was short-lived. Eva was quick to marry David, moving into the house they had once shared as a family. Yet, despite her outward kindness, there was always something off about Eva. Sara couldn't pinpoint it at first, but she began to sense a distance, a coldness in the way Eva spoke to her. Unlike the nurturing, patient love her mother had given her, Eva was distant and often aloof. Her attention was mostly focused on David, leaving Sara to wonder if she had a place in this new family at all. The family's financial struggles added to the tension. David's job at the local mill didn't bring in much, and while Eva worked as well, the strain of making ends meet hung over them like a dark cloud. They had little in terms of material wealth, but Eva was always focused on appearances, keeping up a facade of harmony, even as the cracks in their home began to show. Sara, caught between wanting to belong and feeling like an outsider in her own home, struggled to find her place. Every day felt like she was walking on a tightrope, unsure if she would fall into the abyss of resentment or acceptance. As the days passed, her mixed feelings toward Eva grew stronger, her heart torn between the hope that this woman could somehow become her mother and the growing discomfort that whispered something was wrong. It was a cold afternoon when Sara first stumbled upon the truth. The village was blanketed in thick fog, and she had been helping Eva clean out the attic, a task that had been long overdue. As Sara shifted through dusty boxes filled with old photographs, forgotten clothes, and her late mother's belongings, something caught her eye. A small, weathered envelope, tucked beneath a pile of old books, seemed out of place. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but the name written in bold, looping letters sent a chill down her spine. Eva Hartwell. Curiosity got the better of her. She slid the letter from the envelope and began to read, her eyes scanning the words in disbelief. The letter was dated years before Eva had ever met David. It was from a man named Robert, someone Sara had never heard of, and it spoke of a love affair that had ended in heartbreak and betrayal. The words were filled with desperation and anger, hinting at something far darker than Sara had ever imagined. You cannot keep running, Eva. You can't hide from your past forever. I know what you did, and I won't let you destroy me too. Sara's heart raced as she read further. The letter revealed that Eva had once been involved in a criminal scheme, something illegal that had involved money laundering and deceit. But what truly shocked Sara was the final line. I'll never forget what you did to me. You'll never be free of your past. Sarah's hands shook as she folded the letter back and hid it under her blouse. She couldn't believe what she had just read. Eva, the woman who had been so kind, so gentle with David, couldn't possibly have a past like that. It didn't make sense. She had always assumed that Eva's story was one of a woman who had suffered heartbreak after losing a husband, someone who had been simply trying to rebuild her life. But the letter, that one simple letter, had shattered everything Sara thought she knew. Over the following days, the revelation lingered in Sara's mind like an uninvited guest. Every time she looked at Eva, something felt different. The warmth that once seemed genuine now seemed forced, like a mask Eva wore to hide something deeper. David remained completely unaware, still wrapped up in his own grief and attempts to hold the family together. But Sara couldn't let go of what she had discovered. Her suspicion grew, but she couldn't bring herself to confront Eva. Not yet. She spent nights lying awake, thinking about that letter, piecing together bits of the past that didn't add up. There had been times when Eva's behavior didn't quite align with what she expected of a loving stepmother. Sara had caught her sneaking phone calls late at night, speaking in hushed tones, and always hanging up whenever Sara entered the room. There were strange absences, moments when Eva would disappear for hours at a time with no explanation. And there was the odd, lingering unease Sara felt whenever Eva interacted with people outside the family, people she didn't recognize, who seemed to know her better than Sara ever could. Then came the day when Sara overheard a conversation that only deepened her fears. She was walking through the hallway late one evening when she heard Eva's voice. It was soft, but the words were unmistakable. "I told you I would take care of it. No one can know. Not yet." The second voice, muffled but familiar, answered back. "You can't keep hiding forever, Eva. Someone will find out. I'm telling you, you're running out of time." Sara's pulse quickened. She recognized the voice on the other end. It was Robert, the man from the letter, the one whose life had been destroyed by Eva's actions. Her mind was spinning. Could Eva still be involved in whatever had happened back then? Was she still running from something, even now in their home? Sara felt like the walls were closing in around her, suffocating her with the weight of the secret that Eva had been keeping hidden for so long. That night, as Sara lay in bed, the disbelief turned to anger. How had Eva, the woman who claimed to love her father, kept such a dark secret from them all this time? How had she manipulated them into believing she was just a simple woman trying to start over? It wasn't just about the lies anymore. It was about the betrayal. Eva had built a life on deceit, and Sara couldn't understand how her father had never seen it. The following morning, Sara decided she had to get to the bottom of it. She couldn't just sit back and wait for Eva to slip up. But she needed more proof. As she watched Eva in the kitchen that morning, she found herself wondering if the woman she had once tried to accept as a mother was nothing more than a stranger. Sara's mind was racing, but one thing was clear. She had no choice now but to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Sara's heart pounded in her chest as she pieced together the fragments of the puzzle she had uncovered. Each new discovery seemed to confirm the darkest of her suspicions, but the truth was even more complicated and dangerous than she could have imagined. After a sleepless night spent in the attic, sifting through old boxes and finding more letters, Sara learned that Eva's past was far more than just a string of bad choices. Eva had once been married to Robert, the man whose letters she had read. Their relationship had been a whirlwind romance, one that had seemed perfect on the outside, but beneath the surface was something far darker. Eva and Robert had been involved in a series of illegal activities, from money laundering to falsifying documents, and Robert's eventual betrayal was only the tip of the iceberg. Sara learned that Eva's first husband had been a powerful figure in a criminal underworld that had operated for years in the city. He had introduced Eva to the world of high-stakes gambling, fraud, and corruption. As she read through the accounts of their marriage, Sara's stomach turned. Eva wasn't just a victim, she was an active participant. She had used her beauty and charm to deceive others, making deals with the wrong people, and even disappearing for days at a time to escape the consequences of their actions. But what struck Sara most was the fact that Eva had fled from that life, leaving Robert and her former life behind, as if it had never happened, only to reinvent herself in this small town, under a new name. Eva's decision to cut ties with her past wasn't a noble one. It was a calculated escape from the mess she had created. And she hadn't come clean with David about who she truly was. She had met him just a few months after disappearing from Robert's life. She had sold him a carefully crafted story of a woman who had suffered loss, someone who had built a new life from the ashes. But in reality, Sara now realized Eva had run from the consequences of her actions, never fully looking back, never acknowledging the destruction she had caused in her previous life. The emotional impact on Sara was profound. The woman she had accepted as a stepmother, her father's second chance at happiness, was not who she had believed her to be. For years, Sara had pushed aside the nagging doubts, thinking Eva was simply a woman who had lost her way. But now, Sara could see the truth. Eva had left a life of lies behind, and she had taken great pains to bury that past, including the one piece of information Sara had uncovered: that Eva's marriage to Robert had been marked by violence and deceit. The more Sara learned, the more she realized the extent of the manipulation Eva had wrought. She had built her relationship with David on lies, all the while keeping her secrets hidden beneath a calm, collected exterior. The emotional toll was overwhelming for Sara. She felt betrayed, angry, and utterly lost. She had given Eva the benefit of the doubt, believing she was a woman trying to make a fresh start. But now she saw a woman who had deliberately deceived everyone around her, including her father. The family's stability, already fragile after Rachel's death, was now on the brink of collapse. Sara felt like her whole world had been turned upside down. Her father, David, still had no idea about Eva's past. He was completely blind to the woman he had married, and Sara knew that if she revealed the truth, their entire life would be thrown into chaos. David was already struggling with the weight of his first wife's death and the responsibility of raising Sara on his own. The idea of him facing the truth about Eva's past, the life she had carefully concealed, filled Sara with dread. She couldn't bear to see her father shattered all over again, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the injustice of what had been done to him. But Sara knew she couldn't keep the secret. She had seen the cracks in Eva's facade, the little moments of guilt and fear that flickered across her stepmother's face. She had watched Eva disappear into the night, answering calls from strangers with hushed tones. The fear in Eva's eyes when she thought no one was watching was now so obvious to Sara. The woman who had been her stepmother, who had claimed to care for her and her father, was living in constant fear of her past catching up with her. Eva's emotional distance had always been a source of tension in their home, but now Sara saw it as a defense mechanism, a way for Eva to keep others from getting too close, too aware of the truth. Every time Sara tried to approach her, to bridge the gap that had grown between them, Eva pulled away, putting up walls that felt insurmountable. It was as if the woman who had seemed so open and warm had always been running from something. Sara's mind was made up. She had to confront Eva, not just for her own peace of mind, but for the sake of her family. This secret couldn't remain hidden any longer. But as she prepared herself for the confrontation, a terrible question haunted her. What would happen if she told David? Could their family survive the storm that was about to hit them? Sara could already feel the weight of the truth bearing down on her. She wasn't just about to reveal a secret. She was about to shatter her father's world. But she knew that the longer she waited, the harder it would become. The tension in the house was palpable as Sara paced back and forth in her room. Her mind raced with thoughts of what was about to unfold. She couldn't keep the truth bottled up any longer, but the fear of how it would affect her family was overwhelming. What if revealing the secret tore them apart? What if her father never forgave Eva? But the weight of the lies was crushing her, and the time had come for the confrontation. That evening, as David went to bed early, Sara found herself face to face with Eva in the dimly lit kitchen. The air seemed thick with unspoken words, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound between them. Sara stood still for a moment, her heart pounding, and then, without thinking, she blurted it out. "I know about your past, Eva." Eva froze, a brief flicker of panic flashing across her face, before she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "What are you talking about, Sara?" Her voice was steady, but there was a slight tremor in her hands as she wiped them on her apron. "You think I don't know? I found the letters." Sara's voice shook, but she pressed on, her eyes never leaving Eva's. "I know about Robert, about everything you did, how you left him and tried to erase your life. You can't hide from the past anymore." Eva's face paled, and for a long moment she didn't say anything. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of the unspoken truth. Sara's eyes burned with the need for answers, for an explanation that would make sense of the woman she had called her stepmother for years. Finally, Eva spoke, but her voice was low and filled with fear. "Sara, you don't understand. It wasn't like that. You don't know what it was like. I had no choice." Her voice cracked, and for a split second, Sara saw a vulnerability she hadn't noticed before. "I don't understand," Sara repeated, incredulous. "You ruined people's lives, Eva. You ran from your mistakes and built a new life on lies. You lied to Dad, lied to me." Her anger bubbled over and she took a step forward. "I thought you were someone I could trust, someone who actually cared about us." Eva's eyes flickered with pain, and for a moment, Sara could almost feel the weight of her stepmother's inner conflict. Eva took a deep breath, steadying herself before she spoke again, but this time her tone was more defensive, almost desperate. "Everything I did to survive. You have no idea the kind of man Robert was. He dragged me into his mess, made me part of something terrible. When I left him, I thought I could start over, live a simple life. I never meant to hurt anyone, especially David." Her voice trembled with the strain of holding back emotion. "But when I met him, I knew I couldn't tell him about my past. I couldn't risk losing him. So I ran. I ran to protect him, to protect us." Sara's heart twisted at her stepmother's words. There was guilt in her voice, a raw emotion that seemed real, but something about it felt hollow. The more Eva spoke, the more Sara realized that it wasn't just about protecting David. Eva had spent years hiding from the truth, from the consequences of her actions. And now, that secret was unraveling, threatening to destroy everything. Before Sara could respond, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat. David stood in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock. I heard everything," he stammered, his voice barely audible. Sara's stomach dropped. She had never intended for this to happen in front of him. The last thing she wanted was to shatter his world with the truth. David's eyes flicked between Sara and Eva, the confusion and hurt on his face palpable. "Eva," he said, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Is this true? What Sara is saying? What is all this about?" Eva's face twisted in guilt as she met David's gaze, but the weight of the truth was too much to deny. She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "David, Her voice cracked, and she stopped herself, unable to find the words. "I'm sorry, I never meant for you to find out like this." David took a step back, his face contorted with a mix of anger, hurt, and betrayal. How long have you been lying to me?" His voice was quiet, almost broken. Sara watched as her father's world seemed to shatter before her eyes. He had always been so trusting, so loving, and now here he was, caught in the web of lies that Eva had woven for years. His heartache was visible, and it made Sara want to take it all back, to go back to a time when things were simpler, before she had uncovered this terrible secret. Eva, her eyes filled with regret, stepped forward, trying to reach David. "I was trying to protect us, David. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted you to find out this way. Please, you have to understand." But David pulled back, shaking his head in disbelief. "How can I understand this, Eva? How can I understand you anymore?" His voice broke as he stepped away from her, retreating into the shadows of their home. Sara felt the weight of the moment crush her. The confrontation had shattered their family, and there was no turning back. The truth had come to light, but at what cost? The silence that followed was heavy, and for a long time no one spoke. The family that had once seemed so whole and happy was now fractured, torn apart by secrets, lies, and betrayal. The days that followed the confrontation were filled with an unbearable silence. The air in the house felt heavy, thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Sara couldn't escape the haunting image of her father's face when he had learned the truth. She had never imagined that exposing Eva's secret would feel like this, so painful, so final. Each step she took around the house, each glance at the empty spaces that used to feel safe and warm, reminded her of the fracture she had caused in their once happy family. The lie had been exposed, but now Sara was left with the fallout, the emotional wreckage that was left behind. Sara's heart was torn in two. On one hand, she felt vindicated. She had exposed the truth, and the lies that had been weighing on her were no longer secrets. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the guilt of destroying the only family she had left. She had wanted to protect her father, to keep him from the truth for as long as possible, but in the end, it had all come crashing down. Her father had always been so kind, so trusting. How could she have let him marry a woman with such a dark past? How could she have trusted Eva after everything she had learned? The house had become a cold, distant place. Every conversation felt forced, every interaction strained. David withdrew into himself, retreating into the small office at the back of the house, where he spent long hours staring at the walls as if searching for some kind of answer. He couldn't look at Eva the same way anymore. He couldn't even look at Sara with the same warmth he once had. His trust had been shattered, and with it, the delicate balance of their family. Sara found herself caught in the middle, struggling to reconcile her loyalty to her father and her newfound distrust of Eva. She didn't know who to be angry at, Eva for the betrayal, or herself for being the one to expose it. Every time she looked at Eva, she saw the woman who had lied, the woman who had kept secrets. But there were also moments when she saw the woman who had tried, in her own way, to care for them. It was confusing. The emotions were tangled, and Sara didn't know how to untangle them. Forever, the aftermath was just as painful. She had never imagined that her past would come back to haunt her like this, that the life she had worked so hard to escape would one day catch up with her. Eva had built a life with David, had convinced herself that she was far away from the person she used to be. But now, with the truth out in the open, she was confronted with the consequences of her past actions. The betrayal she had caused was deep, and she knew that no apology could undo the damage. Eva tried to reach out to David in the days after the confrontation, but he was cold, distant. He wouldn't meet her eyes, wouldn't listen to her explanations. It was as if everything he had believed about their life together had evaporated in an instant. And Sara was angry at her, and rightfully so. Eva couldn't blame her for that. She had betrayed their trust, and now she had to live with the consequences. In her solitude, Eva found herself battling the remorse that gnawed at her every moment. She had tried to convince herself that she was protecting David by keeping her past a secret, but now she saw it for what it truly was, a selfish act. She had kept a secret from the man she claimed to love, and in doing so, she had destroyed their trust. Her heart ached with the realization that she might never be able to regain that trust, that their family might never be the same again. But even in the face of this overwhelming guilt, Eva couldn't give up. She couldn't let this be the end. Redemption was something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before, but now it was the only thing she had left. If she was ever going to earn back David's trust, if she was ever going to make things right with Sara, she would have to start by facing her mistakes head on. Eva took small steps toward redemption. She started by trying to make amends with Sara, offering her heartfelt apologies and explaining the pain she had carried for years. "I was so afraid of losing everything," Eva confessed one night, her voice trembling. "I thought I could keep the past buried, but it's not that easy, is it?" Sara listened, but her heart was still conflicted. Part of her wanted to believe Eva, wanted to forgive her, but the betrayal ran so deep and the damage had been done. How could she ever trust Eva again? It felt like too much, too soon. As for David, he remained distant. He hadn't spoken much to Eva since the revelation, and Sara could see the toll it was taking on him. He spent his days working long hours, trying to bury the pain. Every time Sara tried to talk to him about Eva, he would change the subject or retreat into his office. It was clear that he was still struggling to process everything, and Sara could only hope that, with time, he would come to terms with the truth. For now, the family was in a state of limbo, caught between the past and the present, unsure of how to move forward. But Sara knew one thing for certain: healing wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, was not easily mended. Yet there was still a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, with time, the wounds would heal. Perhaps the family could find a way to rebuild, to find a new sense of balance and understanding. But it would take effort from all of them, Eva, David, and Sara, if they were ever going to move past this betrayal and find a way to heal. The road ahead was uncertain, and the future felt like a heavy burden. But one thing was clear: the family they had been before could never return. A new family would have to emerge from the wreckage, one built on the hard lessons of the past and the possibility of forgiveness. Time, as it often does, began to soften the raw edges of pain. It wasn't a quick healing process. No, the wounds ran too deep for that. But slowly, the family started to find a new rhythm, a new normal. The house, once cold and quiet, was beginning to feel like home again, though different. There was an unspoken understanding now that things would never be the same. But there was also a quiet hope that, with time, they could rebuild. David, still distant at times, began to open up more, particularly in moments of shared quiet. The tension between him and Eva wasn't gone, but they were both trying in their own ways to move forward. The cracks in their relationship hadn't healed, but they had started to accept that the past couldn't be erased. Eva continued her efforts, apologizing whenever the opportunity arose, proving through actions, small gestures of kindness, that she was committed to change. She took responsibility, no longer hiding behind the veil of denial, and for that, David began to soften. It wasn't enough to fully erase the betrayal, but it was a step. For Sara, the journey was equally complicated. Her emotions had been a roller coaster: anger, betrayal, confusion, and guilt all mixed together. But as weeks passed, Sara found herself asking a difficult question. Could she forgive Eva? Could she reconcile the woman who had lied with the woman who had cared for her in her own way? The answer wasn't simple. Forgiveness wasn't a switch she could flip, and yet she realized that holding on to the anger was only hurting her. It was a slow process, but with each conversation, each small gesture from Eva, Sara started to believe that it was possible, however bittersweet it might be. The family wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, and sometimes the past would resurface like an unwanted shadow. But the possibility of healing hung in the air, fragile but present. They had survived the storm of revelations, and in doing so, they had earned a new kind of understanding. Whether or not the relationship would ever be fully restored, only time would tell. But in this moment there was hope, quiet, humble and real, that they could forge a new path, one step at a time.